I grew up with my dad riding motorcycles, and my grandfather rode motorcycles. And so my dad, we used to go for long rides. We'd ride. My grandparents moved out to Arizona when I was young, and so my dad and I would ride from California to Arizona. So that I have a lot of memories of that. And then when I was about 16, my dad said, "You got to learn how to ride a motorcycle." So he threw me on. And I remember dropping his motorcycle many times in a parking lot trying to do slow moving turns and that sort of thing. And then when I was in Australia shooting Elvis, I met a guy named Cohen who owned this cafe. That was my favorite cafe out there. And he fixed up old Harleys. And so we would go riding together. And so that was my first time getting on an old bike. And then when I spoke to Jeff for the first time, then I just immediately just doubled down and started riding all the time. There's many mysteries around Benny, and there's many things that I've sort of filled in for myself, but essentially Benny's a young guy who has fallen out with his family, and his father passed away, and I believe he had some sort of trauma in his past that's led to him becoming a sort of lone wolf. But yet there's this part of humanity that craves togetherness, you know? And so within that lone wolf attitude, he ended up finding the Vandals and ended up getting a sort of father figure or a big brother figure with Johnny, and the camaraderie of all the guys. He meets Kathy, who Jodie plays, and they fall in love and get married very quickly. And but he's always got one foot out of the covers. You know, he kind of has this way of being able to compartmentalize, and he can leave at any moment. And he doesn't want responsibility, doesn't want anybody to need anything from him. And so as long as that remains, then he can have a good time with everybody and have a lot of love for Johnny and Kathy and everybody in the gang. But as soon as anybody starts needing things from him and putting responsibility on him, he can cut ties and bolt. So that's Benny, and he ends up being pulled between Kathy and Johnny, where Kathy wants Benny to stop riding and get out, and Johnny wants Benny to take over. You never know when you meet your heroes if you're gonna get along or how they're gonna treat you or anything. And Tom makes me laugh harder than almost anyone in this world. My stomach hurts when I'm around him. And he's really kind and fun to be around. And then on top of that, he's been really generous with his sort of showing of his toolkit, where we'll talk about acting and he'll kind of go, you know, this is something that I do. And he'll kind of show me, it's like a magician sharing their tricks with you. And that's, I'm endlessly grateful for that. So he feels like a brother now to me. It's been so great getting to work with her, and she's so professional, and the work that she's done on her voice in this is just, he played me before she'd arrived. She sent an audio recording of her voice, and I was just floored by it, because I've heard Kathy's audio recording many times, and it was spot on. My jaw was on the floor. For me, a lot of that is, actually talking to my family in that voice, you know, and talking to people at a coffee shop, and at first you feel funny, you feel kind of like an imposter. And then with time, then it ends up it ends up just feeling like this is how I talk, and then you're not having to translate it, and then that's one less thing you have to think about when you're on set, because there's everything on set is like trying to distract you. There's a camera there, there's people there, there's people talking. You got to remember where the lighting is and where your mark is and everything. So as much as you can stack the deck, I find, to not have to think about things and just be able to be alive, that's the goal. Michael Shannon is we were doing this scene the other night where he's talking about how he wanted to be in the military, and we're sitting around the campfire, and it was some of the greatest acting I've ever seen. And to get to watch that over and over and see how he changes things every time, he's newly alive every take, he's improvising little things, he is so incredibly present. He did a take, and I walked up afterward and walked over to Tom, and Tom looked at me and says, "Doesn't get any better than that." And then he kept doing takes, and he kept finding new things, and it was so inspiring. And Mike as well, he's just an incredibly focused actor, which is also really inspiring, because he'll finish a take and then he walks off by himself and he just smokes a cigarette and just stands by himself. And then he comes back and he hits it again, and it's just, I could watch him all day long. You know, I relish every time that he's on set. Jeff is a very, very special and incredible director. And one of his strengths is that he knows the script inside and out. For one, he wrote it, but two, he wrote it with such care and has thought about every angle, so that by the time that we get to set, he has the blueprint. And that's something he told me early on, is I've already seen the film in my mind, so we have that to fall back on. If you want to try things out there and experiment with things, just know we can always go back to the film that I have in my head. And that's such a comforting support system, you know, as an actor, because then you can make mistakes, you can try things, but you always know that he's got you.
When you're doing a period movie, you have to do it from every single layer, because you never know when something is gonna happen on set. It's not a still image. We've talked about a lot of movies that we almost made since loving. I was particularly excited about this one because the costumes are quite fun to do, and period costuming is really fun. And yeah, I was excited about doing it. And so I kept waiting for it to come together. To hand tool and hand make all of the biker vests, you know, I think had it been a movie with like quadruple the budget and more people, we would have sort of half manufactured them, and I think it wouldn't have looked as real and realistic. It was hand done by some elves. Well, my first call was my ager dyer, for sure. I knew everything needed to look old and worn in and dusty and dirty, and yeah, that was one of my first calls. So when you see it in live person, however old and dirty it looks, it's going to look 30% less old and dirty when you see it in camera, when you see it on the big screen, because it's just what happens. Something happens in the process of filming, and it's farther away, lighting, all the other things happening. So you have to go further than you think. And knowing that is kind of half the battle, as far as, you know, when you're working with an ager dyer and when you're working with everybody around you. And I know if you asked any of my crew, they'd probably say, "She wants more dirt," because I do. I always want more dirt because it always looks like less in camera. The women's fashion's super fun and really interesting. And every woman kind of had their own way into the biker fashion and into the biker world, you know? So some were, I'm just going to borrow a leather jacket and a cut, which is, you know, the vest, and over my regular everyday, you know, peg pant, mock turtle, little sweater. And others were kind of more leaned into being part of a gang and into it. And I think they went a little bit harder, and they would, you know, make their own hat. For example, one of our characters has like a name hat. And it's kind of in the fashion of police hats. And that was something, it's a biker hat, but it is inspired by police hats, which is the irony is like all over the place. Historically, there is actually the repurposing of uniforms, whether it's a cop uniform or a military uniform. You know, we have so much fashion that takes from the uniform and repurposes it. And the biker gangs were doing that. They were taking the motorcycle jacket that was a cop jacket and they were repurposing it. And same with the cop caps, the helmet, the sort of visor caps. You know, those became biker caps. And so it's taking an institution or a uniform and repurposing it and putting your own spin on it. And at the same time, kind of saying fuck you to that institution. Kathy has maintained who she is and not changed as much as you'd maybe think. And that's sort of the interesting sort of twist of her character, that she has this strong inner North Star about her that doesn't change that much when she sort of enters this world. And so we did that with her wardrobe. You know, we didn't have her make some big, huge leap over the years. You know, she's one of those characters that she knows who she is. She knew who she was then. She knows who she is throughout. I mean, there was both the individuality of the group, you know, of each person in the group, and the togetherness of the group. You know, of course, the logo and the rockers in the back of the vests are part of that. Part of it is just, you know, we took every single piece of denim that was in the movie and we overdyed it the same hue. So that's what Major Dyer Troy did. You know, he sort of took all of the denim, whether we built it, which we did for Benny's, or we bought it, which we, you know, or we rented it, you know, depending on wherever it came from, we overdyed it. And that marries it together so it feels like it's coming from the same world. It's a subtle thing that, you know, hopefully you'll never notice. It'll hopefully all look individual, but it kind of puts it all, you know, in the same world. Because a lot of denim, when you do see it, it can read quite 80s, quite stonewashed, even if it's, you know, broken in. And we didn't want anything to read out of our world and out of our time period. Emery, who plays Cockroach, wore the black and white striped sweater. I think, you know, there was this, motorcycle sweaters were a clothing item that people wore a lot back in the day. They had patches, they were, you know, double thick wool, super, super thick, and they were protective. So it was an alternative to a leather jacket kind of a thing. And so it actually existed a little bit before our time period, but, you know, people would have worn them still. And I got a good feeling based on some of the reference material that black and white was kind of a good way to go with him, because he always wore white pants in the pictures, and some kind of dark colored top. And it was black and white photography. So I sort of went with the fact that he should be, you know, two-toned in this way. And that was his sort of defining way. And so his vest, his cut is black, his sweater is black and white, his pants are white or black. I just kind of made it a character element to separate him from the others. The way Jeff kind of intuited this character was that Benny really, you know, I think the most defining thing about him is that he doesn't care about decorating himself, about, you know, wanting to be, he's not curating himself the way a lot of the other biker guys do. And so there's kind of a nonchalance about him. Like, it, and that was important to me, that he wasn't overly done, if you will. Like, he didn't have as many gack and elements to his vest, and he didn't wear jewelry, and he was as sort of stripped down and simple as they get in this world. And that was important to me because it was, every time we'd put a little more on or a little more something, it just like didn't feel like Benny. It didn't feel like he had motivation behind it, He's an anti everything sort of character. I'm so glad we're going to talk about these vests because this is insane when you hear what had to be done. Every single patch has to be cleared for clearances for legal reasons. So we had to make them all. And we had to first design them, then get them made, then age them, then sew them on, then age it again. Every single one. So even these, we had multiples made. That I knew that I had a lot of leather, both boots and jackets, to distress, to make them look worn in. And it takes so many hours and so much time. And we only had 2 months of prep on this movie, which was very quick. And we didn't have time to do it all. So we rented or bought vintage all of our leather. I did not have anything new in the whole movie. So I didn't want to, except there's one. And if somebody can try to figure out, one of my lead characters has a brand new, bought off the internet, Amazon, leather jacket. I won't say which one it is, but we made it to look old. Wonder if people can tell. This is where we got the mud color. Well, we got the mud color everywhere in all of our scenes, and then recreated the paint to be the color of the mud. And yeah, that's why in general, the idea is always that our bike riders were covered in, whether it was just road dust or mud. That's the reason for the dirt, I mean, these guys are scrambling and racing, and so it makes sense. This is a vintage piece. This is a vintage piece that we painted this red stripe on and just put the mud on. Yeah, painted the numbers. Yeah. This is Johnny's jacket. There's a company, my friend. He helped me out on Loving as well. He has a company called Runabout. It's menswear. It's, inspired by this time period, made new. This is one of his jackets. We tweaked it a little bit and created this one. This is kind of cool. This is a real bike chain from Harley Davidson. We bought and made a belt for Benny. It is actually heavy. We said to Austin, I said, I can make this in plastic to look like this, but not be as heavy. And he was like, no, it's cool. I want it to be heavy. It'll feel good. And then we've got Kathy's biker shirt with her chain added to the bottom. These are one of the elements she gets. Obviously, as her character progresses, she doesn't change that much. She would still wear the same sweater, probably underneath. Her color palette gets a little bit darker and a little bit simpler because she starts out in the movie. She's in this when she meets Benny in the.
This is from this will be scene 5.
Exactly.
And he and I spent a lot of time up in Agua Dulce. It's outside of LA, it's north, at a buddy of mine's place. I should say it's Shelley Ward's place. So everybody that's watching this will know who Shelley Ward is if they're in the film business. And we used his place, and I started Austin on a very small bike, big old Austin on this little bike. And then we went to the next bigger bike, and I actually bought a bike that was small for him to ride. And he got pretty comfortable in that. And we started riding around out in the canyon country, just going on long rides and a lot of exercises. I did a lot of exercises with him, starting, stopping, turning. And it really paid off in the end. All that time that I spent with Austin I don't even know the time period. It was chopped up in a big time period, but it was great. It was really good for Austin It was before Elvis had come out, so Austin wasn't noticed out in the world, you know. And it was good stuff. It was really good stuff. He and I, we got along. He's the sweetest guy in the whole world. Normally, the role of one of the stunt coordinators would not be to source the motorcycles, but since I personally own a lot of these motorcycles, my best friend, his name's Oliver Peck, he owns a lot of motorcycles. I have a few other friends that have pretty big collections of these. We decided that I would gather up the motorcycles, make a deck of them so Jeff could look at them. The first conversation I had with Jeff, I don't know his exact wording, but it was something to the effect of, Milburn, I'm gonna rely on you to keep me out of trouble. I don't want to be on a junket somewhere and somebody come up and ask me a question about some motorcycle that shouldn't have been in the show. And I said, don't worry, that is what I'm here for. I will do that. Yeah, Springfield is 66. So Jeff and I had talked about this a lot. We have to be very careful with the motorcycles to see certain parts of them. There's a few motorcycles that actually have a few things that might overlap into later years. So the motorcycles that we have here, we're very careful not to have anything that was, any parts that we can see that are from the 70s. There's, like I say, Harley Davidson, there's some parts on these motorcycles that go from 65 to 80 something, it's all the same stuff, or 66, or I think there's 10 to 12 of these bikes that are mine, that I own personally. There's a good 6 or 7 or 8 that belong to my best friend, Oliver. There's another 9 or 10 that belong to a buddy of mine named Quigley. And then from there, because we have a deck of 45 motorcycles that are the ones that run the length of the show, this group of motorcycles that's behind me is pretty much the original Vandals, what we're calling the OG Vandals, which would be the characters, Benny's character, Johnny's character, Brucey's character, Wahoo's, Corky, those guys, and probably Cowboy and stuff. All the actors that are riding these motorcycles, I had to spend time with them. I spent the most time with Austin, of course. But what happened as they started trickling into Cincinnati, I took in the ones that were really, they had to ride either harder bikes or they really wanted to ride, like Toby Wallace. We rehearsed a lot of group riding, like what we shot a few days ago here at the Springfield rally, where we came in and the Johnny characters and everybody's, myself and there's almost 20 stunt guys all behind him and a couple BG in the back. But yeah, we had to rehearse that over and over again because you can't just have people running each other, and we had to rehearse the way we're going into it. The Kathy stuff, some of that, because there's an actress on the back, I double Austin in this movie, so some of that will be me, and a lot of it will be Austin in real life, but there'll be some of that, like the chase scene with Austin, it'll be me, but Austin is getting so comfortable on a motorcycle, we're gonna get as much footage as Austin as we can. Like Norman Reedus could ride a motorcycle. He's a motorcycle riding guy. But before I came over here to interview with you, I just spent a couple hours with him on the motorcycle he's going to ride, which is a hand shift bike. And the hand shift bikes are the ones that, even guys that ride motorcycles a lot, they're not really accustomed to riding these hand shift bikes. Harley had a lot of hand shift bikes. There's a lot of hand shift bikes in the book, a lot of hand shift bikes in that time period. Austin Butler is on the motorcycle constantly in the movie, which is fine with me, and he loves it. In fact, I had found a motorcycle I was going to buy recently, and on one of our trips to some barbecue place with everybody that we weren't supposed to be on, Austin and I started talking, and my buddy Oliver was here visiting, and he was heading over to a swap meet over in North Carolina, and I made a deal with the guy to bring that bike, and I went and took some money out of my bank account, paid for that bike so Austin could have, and Austin's like, I want it. And so I pretty much bought a bike for Austin. I'm not sure he wanted it. But his bike is really cool. It's a 66 FLH, a lot like the bike he's riding in the show is a 65, which that's one of my bikes. Jeff, the director, and we spent a lot of time deciding who was riding what bike, and so Austin's bike is a 65 Panhead. It's a 65. It's not original paint because it's all beat up, but it is pretty cool. It has the cool little airplane on the fender. It has the lights in the back. It has a lot of little trinkety things, but it's a really good, reliable bike, and that's one of the reasons why I picked it to be the main bike, is it's my personal bike, and I know it's reliable. This red bike that is Johnny's bike Johnny's character, which is Tom Hardy's character, who is Johnny. I hope I'm not screwing this up for you too much. This bike belongs to my buddy Oliver. It's a 55 It belonged to a man who was a mechanic at Six Flags Over Texas. I guess they have their own mechanics. And it was his bike, and it used to be on display at the 50s town in Six Flags, I guess. The Brucey bike, we matched Brucey's bike that was in the book, which we matched as close as we could. I actually spent a lot of time trying to find that bike. I had friends looking for that specific style of bike. There was a sequence where Benny's bike gets run into by a car. I know that there's a shot where Benny's bike gets kicked over, which I don't think I'm going to be able to watch that when that really happens. I can't believe my bike is going over on its side, but that's going to happen, and we'll get through that. Oh, hell yeah.
Okay.
My girlfriend in high school had the photo of the guy riding over the bridge in her bedroom. Yes, of course. Everybody that has ridden an old Harley Davidson you have to kick, they have seen that, at least the photo over the bridge. In '84, I got on my Honda that I had back then, and I put my leather jacket on, I greased my hair up, and at noon, in whatever date it was, in 1984, I rode down to the movie theater, and I watched Streets of Fire, and I thought to myself, that is the world that I want to exist in,
Yeah.
and I am sure that I have been existing in that world since then, and I immediately started figuring out how I was going to get a real Harley Davidson. I know deep down that if this movie is done right, and we don't put modern motorcycles and paint them to be old, we don't green screen things in, if Austin Butler's actually riding that 65 Pan and you see Tom Hardy ride in on that thing and you see the details of this and the way that people are dressed, that it's going to bring it back to its core. This is real. Like, these are real motorcycles. This takes guys that they're not easy to start. I have gone to great lengths for this to happen, for me to have my stunt riders riding on these bikes. I mean, it's a battle because it's expensive to have 28 guys that are motorcycle only. Every one of these guys race motorcycles.
Way back in 2003, I walked into my brother's apartment in Memphis, and I saw this book sitting on the floor. It had a bright red stripe on the bottom with white lettering, simple, that said the Bikeriders. The photograph on top was a black and white photograph of about 4 motorcycle riders cresting a rise in a rural interstate. I immediately was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen, just the look and the feel of it. Then you start opening it up, and there are these incredible photographs, black and white photographs. But in that edition, which was a reissue of Danny Lyon's original book, there were color photographs. And for me, the color photographs just jumped out. I think one of the things that took me the longest was trying to figure out, how to turn a book of photographs into a narrative film. Obviously, there is a lot of text in the book in terms of interviews, but none of that's a story. They're anecdotes. And kind of like training wheels, I actually started with a big section of Kathy's interview where she talks about meeting Benny for the first time. So that actually, it really was. It was like putting, training wheels on to try to get my balance in this story. But from that point on, I really had to start inventing. And the biggest thing that I invented was the idea of this love triangle. The thought that you would have this woman that falls in love with this young, wild guy, but then you have the leader of this club who also falls in love with this young, wild guy. So instead of having a love triangle between 2 guys fighting over the same woman, you have this man and this woman fighting over this young, wild man, which obviously, in this instance, it takes it out of a sexual context only. And it's really more about what is the essence of this guy? What is it about this guy that attracts these 2 people so much so that they're willing to change their lives for him? This idea that there was a specific thing that popped up in a specific place at a specific time, and now it's gone forever. That felt beautiful to me. It felt a little sad, but certainly nostalgic. And I loved the idea that you could have something so potent and so vibrant as it's represented in these photographs that then just is gone. Austin actually came first. So I have to give credit to Brian Kavanaugh Jones, my producing partner. The script had started to circulate, and I think we got an incoming call from Austin's team. At this point, Elvis had not been released. In fact, there hadn't even been a trailer out, but the week that I was supposed to meet Austin, the trailer came out. And I remember looking at it thinking, okay, like, this guy's doing something in this film. Of course, we didn't know to what degree yet, but you could just look at that trailer and say, well, this guy went places for this part. And so on one of my rare trips out to LA, we set up a meeting. It was at a restaurant, and I walked outside to greet him. And this tall guy walks up and holds his hand out. And I just immediately was struck by the fact that this is one of the most beautiful human beings I'd ever seen. He's got this deep voice. He's very polite. He's very sweet. He's very humble. And he was very flattering. He gave me a lot of compliments. All of these are in the plus column. And I just sat there kind of, you know, visiting with him. And it was undeniable that this was a movie star. Francine Maisler, my casting director, tells me, you have to look at Jodie Comer. I start to look at Killing Eve. Obviously, she's very impressive. That show's very dynamic and complex. And then I Zoom with her. And quite frankly, before I got on the Zoom, Francine, she basically called and said, don't mess up. Like, just get her to say yes. Which, you know, takes a bit of my agency away as a director. But Francine had only done that once before. And that was when we were making Midnight Special. She did it with Adam Driver. Before I got on the phone with him, she was like, and who I had no clue who Adam Driver was. She called and was like, don't mess up, get him in the movie. So I felt like this was one of those moments. There are interpretations that Jodie is making into Kathy's character that are far deeper than the words that are on the page. Some of my favorite parts of Jodie's performance aren't just this rapid fire speech that she's giving. It's the moment right after. It's the moment in between her. It's the thing that she does with her face or with her body posture. It's the kind of work that a director loves to see, because it's one thing to take an accent and break it down, which she did. I was lucky enough one day at the end of one of her shooting days, she left some of her work behind. And you know, there's a tremendous amount of dialogue for Kathy in the film. And she had taken every single word and phonetically broken it down to memorize it in that accent. Now that's impressive, but what's really impressive is when she performs it, that all disappears. All of that work is invisible. What makes Tom important in the role of Johnny is he can carry that complexity. He can scare the shit out of you. But then he can also have this extreme vulnerability. I don't quite understand it. He's a force of nature when it comes to acting. And I saw it actually at his house in that initial conversation in London. It's like he vibrates a millimeter underneath his skin. There's something going on with Tom Hardy. And when you put the camera on him, it's all happening at once. He can just be sitting there smoking a cigarette, and there's so much going on there. You know, there are movie stars for a reason, and Tom Hardy is a movie star. I think there was a healthy camaraderie between all these guys, you know. Tom especially, though, I think he would ride Austin a little bit, partly because Tom used to be the guy cast in Austin's part. He said that several times. It was all positive, but one time that it actually affected something that I was really happy about was in that opening bar scene when Benny comes over to talk to Kathy. He pulls his chair around and sits down and talks to her. And of course, we very calculated. We'd put Austin in this shirt with the sleeves cut off so you could see his arms and everything else. And after the first take, Tom yells, who's, you know, sitting watching this whole scene because he's in the background watching this whole scene. Tom yells out, "Hey, Austin, just turn your chair around. Just go ahead and turn your chair around." And I'm pretty sure he was joking. Austin did it. And then it gave him something to prop his arms up on, and these massive biceps and triceps and glistening glistening in the light. And it had to be one of the most like erotic moments I'd ever seen on film. And we all just kind of were like, and so I don't know what Tom was trying to calculate or do there. Maybe it backfired, but it certainly worked for the film. You know, Danny's a really tricky character in the script because he is an observer. But he's also, in observing, he's commenting because he's not part of this world. And as written, I think Danny Lyon was actually far more integrated than our Danny character. You know, in fact, when I showed Danny the film, the real Danny, he loved it, but he also was like, you know, I should have been grungier. Like I didn't quite look that way. And so for me, I think it was important to have a character that could observe without being intrusive. And that's a very difficult thing to ask an actor to do. And I have to give a lot of credit to Mike because he was willing to just show up and observe, but also still be there, you know, to still be present. I mean, there's so many cutaways to his face. We want to know what he's doing. We want to know how he's judging, you know, the things that are coming out of Kathy's mouth and everyone else's, you know. I mean, the truth is, no one shoots a film like Adam Stone. And I think I'm within my rights to say he shoots films because of the way I direct films. I feel like we've grown together through 6 films. Adam doesn't shoot a lot of other stuff, you know. He's very close to Michael Roy, our gaffer, who's been our gaffer since Take Shelter, you know. So I think there's something about Adam Stone that he just doesn't make films that look like other people's films. They look like my films, and I'm very proud of that. I think when you use slow motion and which to my film school professors, the technical term is overcranking. You know, when you use freeze frames, when you use anything like this, I mean, it's a big stylistic choice. And from the very beginning of my career, I always kind of eschewed style. It was like, nope, story first. Story, story, story. I don't want to get in the way as a director. I don't want to show my fingerprints. I really want the story to come through first. However, there are certain times where if you can use it and it doesn't stick out, then you've really achieved something. There are, off the top of my head, 3 slow motion shots in the film. The push in on Benny at the pool table is overcranked. And the shot of Kathy on the back of that motorcycle where she takes that breath is overcranked. I was talking to Mike before we did the scene, and he goes, "You think this is pretty funny, don't you?" I was like, "Yeah, it is pretty funny. You know, you're talking about your mom pulling you out of bed and taking you to the draft board. It's funny." He goes, "Yeah, I don't think it's funny." And you know, you don't argue with Mike. You're just kind of like, all right, let's see where this goes. And I can say that scene is vastly more complex because of the way that Mike Shannon delivered that monologue. Yes, it does start off, and yes, he's funny, and everybody's laughing. But then there's a point where there is this turn where he talks about being rejected by that board. And I didn't see that part as funny, but I certainly didn't see it as the underpinning for the psychology of this entire subculture, which is what Michael Shannon provided. At some point, he turns and says, "We don't want you. You're an undesirable character. We don't want you." And then, because you have these amazing other actors listening, you've got Damon Harriman dropping his eyes. You got Boyd Holbrook pulling his head like this. You know, you've got Carl and Emery and Bo and Norman Reedus, who that was his first night with us, sitting there listening to this. And Norman, just as an example, he comes up to me, he's like, "You know, I'd never fully understood in the script why my character wants to stay with these guys and hang out with them." He's like, "I get it, like they're fun and we have a good time, we're all drinking." He was like, "But I think this speech is why." And there is a moment that I knew was very important to the film. When Kathy is on the back of Benny's motorcycle for the first time, and they're crossing this bridge, and this whole horde of motorcycles comes up around them, and the sounds and the vibrations, it's actually not about Kathy falling in love with Benny. It's about Kathy falling in love with motorcycles and motorcycle culture. And yes, we have the benefit of her voiceover, but it's something you gotta feel. It's something that you have to experience. And so it was a really important piece of the film, because without it, all of her actions following don't really make sense. You have to watch her fall in love with motorcycles. And there is this shot that's in profile, it's handheld, and it's overcranked. It's slow motion of her basically closing her eyes and lowering her head, and it almost looks like she's breathing in the back of Austin's jacket, but she's certainly breathing in the moment. As soon as we got that shot, I was like, okay, good. Success for today. I'm very proud of that scene. And then when you score it to the Shangri-Las, it's the best I could possibly imagine. The motorcycles are the least precise instruments on the planet. These motorcycles, some of which are 60 years old, you know, like we had bikes from the 40s, so that'd be 80 years old almost. I mean, these things, they didn't like it when it was cold, they didn't like it when it was hot, they didn't like it when it was dry, and they didn't like it when it was wet. So out of all of the prima donnas I've ever worked with, these motorcycles were the most. Erin is the one that came to us fully built. Like, she's a professional. Erin is not only the adult in the room, but she's by far the most talented person I work with. I cannot say enough, you know, what she pulled off in the Bikeriders is so dense and so complex. The fact that you look at it and you're like, yeah, they look like bikers. I think that is a gross misunderstanding of what she had to do in terms of getting period correct clothing, aging, weathering, adding dirt, grease, patches. I mean, they sewed patches onto all those jackets. The amount of effort that went in to not just making the clothes, but then making the right clothes. If I, as a director, had to hold someone's hand and walk them through all of the photographs and say, this is what I need, and this isn't right, and that's not right, we would have been dead in the water. And Erin, again, she not only achieves what's necessary, she goes above and beyond. And when you start talking about, we had scenes with hundreds of period correct extras. The amount that she pulled off in the time with the budget given is extraordinary. She is, I think she's one of the reasons the Bikeriders feels as authentic as it does. As for Chad Keith and the production design, you know, it's just so incredible to watch people that you've worked with for a really long time, friends that you've had for a really long time, just work at such a pro level, you know? Like, this is the NFL, this is the NBA. Like, we're not messing around anymore. And to see these people that you knew way younger in life achieve that level and perform at that level is really exciting. And, you know, you walk into the Stoplight Bar, that's kind of the Vandals' hideout, clubhouse. And we took a storefront that had been a kind of a part-time church, I think, with purple carpet and pews, and we transformed it into the Stoplight. You know, just using that as an example of the amount of work and the amount of detail that went into these sets, you know, they took a period correct linoleum pattern and had it printed so that they could lay it down over the flooring. We took numerous examples of glass block and built an entire glass block wall because of one photograph that Danny had given us of the original Stoplight. The Bikeriders follows the development of a Midwest motorcycle club from the late 50s, where it was a regional club just made up of friends, through the course of the 60s into the early 70s, where it grows into a proper biker gang. Kind of end up ending up kind of destroying the original intention for a lot of the members. And the whole thing is viewed through the eyes of Kathy, who's married to one of the Bikeriders. And really, the central conflict for the characters in the Bikeriders is a love triangle between Kathy, her young husband, Benny, and Johnny, the leader of the club. Both Kathy and Johnny are fighting over Benny. Johnny wants Benny to run the club. Kathy wants Benny to stay alive and possibly be out of it. My producing partner, Brian Cavanaugh-Jones, turned me on to an Australian film with Ben Mendelsohn in it called Baby Teeth. I'd never seen it before. Honestly, it's the last film I can remember that made me cry. I highly recommend it to anybody looking for a good movie to watch tonight. But in that film, Toby Wallace plays a young drug addict, and he just pops off the screen. And he's very much like that in real life. He's got an energy to him that I really haven't seen in a lot of people. I think Toby's going to be a movie star, hands down. And what he did for us was he added this very honest, sincere danger to the film. Because it's not just danger from the violence this character is specifically going to inflict. It's the danger that he represents of the entire movement through the 60s of who these guys could become. I mean, if you look into Danny Lyon, at the age of 19, he became the staff photographer of SNCC, the Southern Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So at the age of 19 in Atlanta, he was roommates with John Lewis and took some of the most iconic civil rights photographs you've ever seen before he even did the Bikeriders. That's when he went to Chicago, and then he started riding with this club and photographing them, not to mention all the work he's done since. The guy's prolific, and the guy is a serious legend for American photography. And so for me to show up and say, hey, I really love your book, I want to do something with it, he was very gracious to me, and he's been gracious to me through the entire process.
The main reason I wanted to be a part of this film was to work with Jeff Nichols. You know, he was someone who I'd admired for a very, very long time. So when I initially got the script sent through with his name attached, you know, that was so exciting to me. And then, you know, kind of realizing that the script was based on a photography book and these people were real and, you know, set in the 1960s, 70s, about bikers, you know, that was extremely enticing. So it was kind of all of those elements, really. And then I was very fortunate to have like 30 minutes worth of interviews of Kathy. And I remember kind of reading the script and listening to the audio and just like completely falling in love with her. She's a very exuberant woman who says exactly what she thinks. And she's an incredible storyteller. And I don't think she quite realizes how good of a storyteller she is. So, you know, when she narrates the film, she's kind of, you know, a lot of the story is told from her perspective, which I thought was really interesting. The photos are so beautiful. You know, you can't help but when you read that book, like, want to be a part of it. And I think what's so incredible about Danny is, you know, the kind of environments in which he's captured these people in. Like, with Kathy, I only had like three or two photographs of her, but there was so much that I could draw from those pictures and how, you know, you can see he's been observing and they're not aware that he's taken the pictures. And, you know, as an actor, an actress, when you're coming to do this and you're kind of trying to find every kind of little piece of information, there was actually so much that you were able to draw from the photographs. At the start of the film, we meet her and, you know, it's kind of split between present moment and past and voiceover, and she's speaking about the first time that she meets them. And when she meets them for the first time, like, she's disgusted by them and she's terrified of them, you know? She's like speaking about them having their belly buttons out and, like, you know, it's like a very kind of foreign environment for her. But then there's also the kind of excitement and the thrill of the unknown. And I think with Benny, there was kind of instant connection. And then over time, it's like that novelty and that thing that initially you know, I guess she was able to look past actually became much more dangerous and kind of damaging. And I think, you know, Kathy's had a previous marriage. She has 3 children. I think she really desires a life with Benny, and he doesn't have the kind of, he has an inability to give her that. And it's interesting because I think, you know, Kathy and Johnny are both really seeking something out in Benny that he's unable to give them. He's like the nicest guy ever. And it's kind of funny because a lot of our stuff so far has been just kind of like looks to each other. Like we've had so little dialogue. But, you know, within those moments, you have to tell so much. You know, I remember us having kind of a few conversations before we started because, you know, they've been together for, you know, quite some time within the story, but you never really get a sense of, you never see them in their private moments, and the moments that you do are so fleeting. So it was really important for us to make sure that you get an essence of their relationship, you know, the good and the bad. I remember my first day, I had no dialogue and we were all kind of sat around a campfire, and it was a night shoot and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning and, you know, everyone was freezing cold, and Michael Shannon had like 2 pages of dialogue, and I remember like watching him for the first time and then just kind of looking around, and all of us were just like, well, like we can all just go home. Like it was incredible. It was like a masterclass, you know? And I was sat next to Austin and I was like, you know, we were kind of saying, you know, from now on, I'm just gonna think, what would Michael Shannon do? Whenever I come to a scene, like just think, what would Michael Shannon do? There was just something very kind of confident and unaware about the way she was always poised in images, which I loved. You know, there was no kind of self-awareness, and almost kind of masculine, but then still very feminine in that her hair's done and her nails, like in she always had a red nail, and in a few of the images she was kind of checking them, and so there was kind of those beats that felt very clear and important. There's no kind of bias with her. She was witness to a lot of this. And she very much does just tell it how it is, you know, in all aspects of her life, you know. I think if you ask her a question, she's going to give you a very honest answer because she doesn't overthink it too much. So I think that enables the story to be told in a way that is more honest and more interesting. I think if the guys were telling the story, it would be, you know, it would be very, very different, and there'd be a lot that'd be cut out and maybe made to sound a little bit cooler, or, you know, the difficulties would be erased and it would be glorified, whereas she was always she was a part of it, but she was always on the peripheral, and I think she called things for what they were, you know, and I think she makes for a more reliable narrator because of that.
I actually started getting into photography on my own. And I had bought a camera and I was doing some traveling. And I was actually going to take the rest of the year off. And I wasn't going to take any more work. And I was just going to travel and actually like take photos and just write and hang out and, you know, enjoy my life. And then my agent called and said, hey, we have this script. And I saw that it was shooting in my hometown. I was like, it's kind of weird. There's too many, like, you know, universal signaling, I feel like. So I was like, I think we have to do this. There's too many signs that say I kind of have to do this thing. I drove up to Maine, actually. I spent a weekend, and he has a cabin up there in a lake house. And he goes there for like 2-3 weeks out of the year for fishing. So I drove up to Maine from New York and spent the weekend with him attempting to fish. We caught nothing. And more or less, you know, he showed me how to take photos. He showed me, you know, things. He showed me like all of his like collections of, you know, different letters and pieces that he had and whatnot. And we just chatted and we talked, and, you know, mostly I just sat back on the boat and let him just kind of talk to me about his experience and, you know, meeting the guys and like why he wanted to do it. The photos are their own thing. And then the transcriptions are their own thing as well, because the transcriptions are these really not grotesque, but they're dark stories, a lot of them are, you know? And then these photos, though, are like very romantic in terms of the images that he has of these people. And so, you know, which also I think tracks with what we were kind of saying. I think, you know, for Danny, it's like he can't help but like fall in love with his subjects, if you will. Well, it's kind of like the role of an actor or that of a writer or a director. You know, it's a person that's like just trying to, I mean, that's my favorite part, honestly. One of my favorite parts about what I do is the kind of infiltration, espionage of it all. It's true, though, because I think that's what kind of drew me to it, was because, like, oh, it's not about, you know, like me at all. It's about these people and being able to truly observe them in a way and kind of, you know, be obsessed with those people. I mean, I was excited to see everyone, if I'm being honest, because, like, you know, I moved to New York at 17, wanting to be an actor, and so, you know, I watched Shannon on stage over and over and over again. I, you know, grew up watching Hardy. Can't help it, man. Like, you know, or, you know, Paul Sparks. Like, I grew up watching these guys and wanted to emulate them and, like, be like them. And I studied them for so long in their element that, you know, to then continue to, like we talk about, be the observer and watch them. It's like, man, this is going to be fun. I was like, it's either going to be really fun or it's going to be crazy. And that's a little bit of both. Jeff is so laid back and easy, and I think, like, genuinely excited for whatever's going to happen. You know, he doesn't like to rehearse. He likes to just shoot it, which I think is great, because it's like, oh, yeah, fine, whatever, you know, we'll see what happens. And we're all figuring it out. And the great thing is for the most part, it's hard because usually you're running short on time and you're like, gotta go. But, you know, we've actually had a lot of moments here where we've been fortunate enough to really take our time and do a lot of takes of things. And that's allowed us, at least as actors, to, I think, show up fresh and maybe not have all the answers and start to figure it out together. Austin's great. He's a really lovely guy. And, you know, he's always game. He's pretty much game for everything. And it was a lot of fun watching him. And we had a lot of fun, man. And I really liked, man, actually, one of my photos, it's my favorite photo that I was able to get. And as I was looking through some of my photos, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe that I got that shot. Like, that was one of those things where you're like, oh, I had nothing to do with that. That was just like a weird, like, timing thing, you know? But it was the day when all the guys, it was like, I don't know, we had like 30, 40 guys on motorcycles, and we were in this rural town. We were driving along this road, and there's cornfields everywhere, and the sun was setting. And, you know, I'm on the back, and Austin's up front, and I get this shot of him. And it's one of my favorite photos to this day, honestly. I'm like, I can't believe I got that shot.